Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Baltimore. I first want to say I work with an amazing person, amazing mentor, an amazing spirit, and that's Bob Belfans.
You're here.
Yeah, I came to Baltimore, Johns Hopkins, right after my PhD from Columbia University. And the first 2 years, I just needed to recover. And Bob allowed me to do that. And so I appreciate him, I appreciate Linda and the rest of the crew that's here. And I'm just excited that we're all together, being able to see each other, being able to touch each other for those who want to be touched. But it's just good to be with each other and bonding regarding this important topic. I'm really excited about sharing my research with you all today. The last 2 years, I've been interviewing young people, youth, and their family members in Baltimore about their experiences growing up in Baltimore. And the title of the presentation today is Bearing Strange Fruit, how disinvestment and disconnection hinder adult and career success. But before we move forward, I want to have 15 minutes of just 15 seconds of just silence for the lives that were lost in Buffalo. Thank you. Those are the names of the people who we lost. And I take it very seriously because I think many people do not understand the racial trauma that people experience every single day. And doing this research, I uncovered how racial trauma can really impact people's lives, but also their educational experiences. And this one quote I got from CNN actually, one person said, "We didn't have much, and you took what was left." And it made me really think about where we are today in the world and how they fought for this grocery store in this, segregated community, disinvested community also. And the one thing that they did have, someone just said, was lost. But not only that, precious lives were lost. So I want us to think about this in relation not only to the incident that occurred, but an ideology that has formed and continued to foster in our society that really tries to say that, minorities, people of color, gays and lesbians, Jews, blacks, are taking good jobs. And their white people are going to be, replaced. And I think that that's something that is deeply rooted in our country. And I think it's time for us to really unpack that so we can ensure that we do produce the pathways of adult success for all human beings. And this ideology provides justification for violence. It also builds belonging and solidarity. But not only that, it gives significance. It makes people feel that they're special. And so when we think about this replacement theory, I want us to think about those three different things and how we hear that, and sometimes it's coded in the conversations that sometimes we have with people. But being able to identify that, because we want to ensure that all students, all youth, have the opportunity to learn. What we do with the Nobody Asked Me campaign is we really think through what we are hearing when it comes to educational experiences of youth in Baltimore. And after really thinking through some of these educational experiences, also having strategy groups where we met with elected officials and experts on topics regarding, education and transportation, as well as city council members, city council, not members, but city council, city mayors, and other people within the elected arena. We developed a term, not developed a term, but we thought of the idea of strange fruit. And this is coming from the Jewish school teacher who actually wrote a poem, and then Billie Holiday, Baltimore native, actually made it into a song. And what it was trying to do, this song, was bring awareness to the lynching and racial oppression that people are encountering. And that was back in 1930s, 1920s, 1940s. I am not, with the incident we just saw, we know that this is still going on. But strange fruit for us, when we think about it, really relates to the ideologies that justify violence, that betrays government promises when it comes to a thorough and efficient education, or adequate education, or equity, or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, how that is being betrayed every single day. But not only that, the blocking of resources and opportunities in a global economy. But not only that, when we think of strange fruit, we also see this blame that's placed on marginalized groups for being just human beings and being in structures that sometimes do not treat them fairly. So if you hear this word strange fruit, we're really trying to get at some of those issues to make sure that our young people, regardless of race, regardless of social class, regardless of gender, really have the opportunity to reach their full potential and actually gain adult success. My argument today is that strange fruit is lynching meaningful educational experiences and high aspirations, and lynching adult and career success for too many of our youth. Today, I just want to uncover and identify some of the strange fruit that we uncovered in our 2 years. Also, just highlight two of some of the most important themes that we developed. And that really is the everyday violence and terror that our young people encounter that we sometimes don't even think of. But not only that, really highlighting aspirations and our young people pathways and what they are thinking about when it comes to pathways. So this approach is different. Is really hearing the voices of our young people as well as family members. So it's going to be maybe a different story, but this story is so important for us to understand and know so that we really can produce a discourse and a conversation to bring meaningful change. And that's what we're going to try to do with our policy recommendations at the end. All right, so I already mentioned, we interviewed over 140 youth and their family members. Many of them current students or former students in Baltimore. The age was 14 to 24, and the family members, we didn't really care about the age of the family members, but we received a lot of parents and grandparents. That's what most of the participants were in the study. If you look at this chart right here, you'll see, this graph right here, you'll see that this is Baltimore, and we actually, did a good job. We hit mostly all of the areas in Baltimore. The dark green areas are the ones where we got the most people. But we hit overall many areas in Baltimore. All right, so let's get in uprooting strange fruit in an American city and using Baltimore as the example. So in 1910, the mayor of Baltimore said blacks should be quarantined in isolated slums in order to reduce the incidence of civil disturbance, to prevent the spread of communicable disease into the nearby white neighborhoods, and to protect property values among the white majority, right? We now know that that's strange fruit. It's very important for us to talk about this because I think oftentimes we're still dealing with this historical strange fruit that still come about that really makes minorities, people of color, particularly African Americans, viewed as other, right? We're talking about the replacement theory, viewed as other, right, in America. But not only just other, we think about spreading disease, right? But not only that, isolated slums, the hyper-segregation that many African Americans experience every single day. Many of us teach in schools or in schools that are hyper-segregated, basically buying into this ideology that became a practice, right? Became a part of the racial covenants and segregation in our society. But also the civil disturbance. You know, blacks are causing crime. Blacks are, cause so many problems in our society. But not only that, his quote also brings up quarantine. And many of us now know what quarantine really is. And it's to hit Bob's point earlier, think about, this quarantining that's been going on for over hundreds of years. This replacement kind of ideology that they're other and they need to stay over in this other place, while many Americans do not have to worry about this situation and be able to participate in the global economy and find pathways of success. And this is what we're really trying to get at when we're talking about this. It is not just segregation, but the preventing the resources and opportunities in certain communities as well. So, since that occurred in Baltimore, you see that we have the racial covenants in the early 1900s. Also then after that, in 1930s to 1968, our government-sponsored redlining that gave white Americans loans to move into the suburbs, right? But not only that, if you keep on going, at the same time in Baltimore, we had block busting, where it was when a black person, realtors paid for or would allow a black person to live in a house for a cheap price, but then tell the neighbors, oh my God, blacks are moving in. So you see, what we have rooted in our country is still coming out. And it's important to see all of that, if you keep on going down, 1950 to 1964, this urban renewal that replaced many African Americans in Baltimore, as well as lately in the 2000s, the steering blacks into subprime lending, ghetto loans, right, really impacted black communities, and then 2005, 2007, you see white first-time buyers enjoyed net gains of 50%, while new black home buyers lost 47%. So this is all connected, and I want us to understand that this is not just something that's just occurring, out of the blue, but is deeply rooted in some of the ideas and ideologies that we take for granted every single day. And we're living this out every single day. And that's why it's so important for us to understand this and unpack this important work. So if you look at what we discovered, the new current strange fruit in Baltimore, right? This war on drugs that devastated Black communities throughout the United States. When you think about the violence, and gratuitous violence for us, it's not just looking at, the guns, someone got shot, or someone got killed, or someone got beat up, but also how violence is structured, right? And that's something that I would love to talk about later on, but how we structure people without resources and opportunities in segregated quarantine areas. What does that do? And how does that relate to an underground economy as well? So something that we really need to think about, the underfunding of many of our schools, right? The racial segregation that we mentioned earlier, the disparities in transportation, the white flight, and then also the neoliberal reforms, right? So when people started moving to the suburbs, we stopped thinking about the public good in inner cities. And everything became about choice. If you choose an equity instead of receiving equity as a public good, right? And so I want us to think about all these things that our students are encountering as they are trying to graduate, as they are thinking about their futures and their next steps, So often we do not put this all together, but when you look at that, our students are really encountering strange fruit. All right, so one of the things that we're going to talk today is about this mundane terror. Like, how can terror be mundane? But after hearing the voices of the young people in Baltimore, we really saw that many of our students are really encountering violence or the perceived idea that violence could happen to them at any time. And one of the things that I want us to really understand is trying to ensure that we produce policies, we produce practices that we really try to support our young people as they are encountering this mundane terror, this everyday violence that they're encountering, not only in their schools, but also in their homes. So let me give you some understanding of this. So let's go to the strange fruit first. So in the late 1960s, we started having a war on drugs, right? And one of the Nixon's actually policy advisor said the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, remember, once again, the enemy, bringing disease, bringing drugs, causing civil disturbance, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did, right? So this ideology, and it was actually, so people would know that I'm, not for Republicans or Democrats, was accepted by Democrats, including many Black politicians throughout the United States, because we're trying to figure out, how do we keep our country safe? How do we stay safe? The problem is we made the same people we've always made the enemy. black men, black people. And we made them corner boys, and we started looking within these communities and focusing on them instead of how drugs got here in the first place, right? So we made black people, once again, the enemy, right? The Baltimore doing the number of drug arrests is devastating, right? When you think about in 1980s, 99,000, 1990s, 171,000. In 2000, 271,000, right? Arrested for drugs possession or drug arrest. So 9 out of 10 people, who were arrested were African American. And so you see that several people from 1980 to 2014, 536,000 people arrested in Baltimore alone on this war on drugs, on this hyper-segregated African American communities in Baltimore without resources and opportunities, and couldn't take full advantage of the government loans who helped everyone else get out. So I want us to think about that as we are thinking through what's going on in many of the areas that we have schools in the United States. In Baltimore, 1/3 of Maryland prisoners are from the city, although Baltimore accounts for less than 10% of the state population. And Maryland has the highest rate of incarceration for black men among the 50 states, despite making up just 31% of the state's total population. 70% of the prison population is black. And many of us, including myself, know about this war on drugs because my family was devastated by this war on drugs. And I actually grew up in a middle-class black home outside of LA, but my brother spent 12 years in prison while I was at Columbia getting my PhD. So this is serious, what we're dealing with, and also the trauma it is causing on our young people, right? This intergenerational trauma I want us to fully understand of making African Americans the enemy, particularly black males in this situation. So when I talk to students, they talk about the terror that they encounter with the police, right? And one student said, 17 years old, honestly, I feel like that makes me just scared to just walk out and stuff. It makes me like the perspective of cops that I know. I shouldn't go against them or whatever, but it keeps on happening on repeat and stuff. So I have this mentality in my head that cops are bad. You know what I mean? So I don't know, right? So we have young people who are experiencing, thinking that they, or I should say, we may think that cops are there to protect and serve, but our young people are telling a different story. Telling a story to the point where it's bringing terror in their lives and their commute to school. They're worried about, because they don't know if they should trust cops or not. Because once again, if you look at that ideology, it made many of them the enemy anyway. Also, when you think about the terror of unfairness, many of our young people are feeling like our society is extremely unfair, and it causes another form of terror that they experience. Candy says, first of all, I'm scared of the law as well, because it's just so unfair. And I'm not scared of it because of the rules, but it's just so unfair. The rules, okay, cool. But the people who enforce the rules and the people who get to sentence you to this, The punishment, I'm terrified. Because I know if I was in a situation like that, and I was innocent or whatever situation may be, I'm not going to get a fair trial because of my skin color. And for real, gender doesn't even matter anymore. It's just whatever color you are, whatever action you were claiming to do, it's just you're not going to get a fair trial. And it also depends on who's sitting up there sentencing you. It's just not fair. We got several quotes like this, but really trying to get at the point of thinking society is not fair, particularly law enforcement and how law enforcement are viewing many of the youth as they just go back and forth to school. But to get to the point of mundane, and it's constant, right? The one student, Tanya, says, the city is dangerous, but do I have to worry about it being directly dangerous to me? No. But being out and about, yes. Because anything can happen at any time. The crime rate, police brutality, a lot of racial stuff still going on. You just got to be cautious. You just got to be cautious in the city because it's dangerous. Because you don't know nobody's mindset. She gets it. Mindset, ideologies, mindset. But here, it's every man for himself. And I find this very interesting because Tanya brings up not only the terror that she's experiencing, crime rate, police brutality, but also racial trauma, racial issue. And she says, go back to, but it's related to some of the mindsets, right? But then what this does and what happens in these communities often is, who do you trust, right? You can't trust police. Can you trust your teacher? Can you trust your principal? Can you trust your fellow brother and sister who you see walking up and down the street? So this concentrated poverty, this racial segregation and the disinvestment and the lack of resources in certain communities causes, for me, all of these issues that we just call mundane terror. And then something that, many people are not aware of, but even terror on the commute, on the bus. And one student says, I cannot even tell you the amount of times students got jumped on the way home from school. It was a very, very regular occurrence, especially because we had to use the public school buses. And so my parents would say, you should use the bus to get home, but if it's getting a little late, just call us. We'll come pick you up. I had several friends who were following, right? And so the commute on the buses is also a very important point. But another important point that I want us to really think about, the people who are in this room, is the sexual harassment that our young people are experiencing on their way to school, that we really need to work on to prevent this from occurring. And Robin says, a lot of times there's people not actively smoking, but you could tell that they were just smoking. And they will say or do inappropriate things. And there's not really someone to be a barrier in between that. Like sexual comments or grabbing you and stuff like that. Just weird sexual harassment, I would say it is. So a lot of times we don't think about this, but even on the way to school for many people in Baltimore, they're experiencing sexual harassment. And our data says that it's not just females, it's also males as well. So the question is, how are we protecting our young people, right? And what do we need to do to stop this mundane terror that they're experiencing? And then the last quote from this section is just really getting to the deficit framing. And this is terrorizing as well. And one you said, they didn't give transportation for especially buses for kids to be able to make it to school on time, mainly because the budget's being cut short and we're not getting a lot of funding because we don't have the best reputation. So with the city budget that comes with our reputation being completely destroyed by the reputation of Black people, due to our history and with our history being tied into now and how gang violence and drug distribution mainly throughout the Black community, Black men, the ties into how much the government wants to control our budget and how much money is flowing into our city because they don't necessarily want it to go into the wrong place. And so we have this young student who is really buying into a deficit framing of his own Black people, but also thinking because of the reputation of the school that they're going to receive less. But not only less when it comes to funding, but because of what he's encountering when it comes to gang violence and drug distribution in Black communities. And so we have a lot of work to do when it comes to the terror and the mundane violence that our young people are experiencing every single day. And the last quote is really the idea of no escape. One of the things that always stick out to me the most about the differences in the part of Baltimore is that if you go to the poorer parts of Baltimore, it's really like a cracked concrete jungle. You feel like you're in a city and you feel like you're stuck in the city. It doesn't feel like there's any escape from the very short radius around where you are. And so when we think about young people and what we're calling this mundane terror, is because of the interactions they're having with police, the interactions that they're having with peers, on the way commute to school, the sexual harassment and commute to school, the deficit framing of youth, as well as, and this deficit framing, I want to say, is internalized as well. This is very important to point that out, right? Black people are American. I always say Black people are more American than white Americans because they really buy into many of the ideologies that are rooted in America, right? And still patriotic, even after slavery and Jim Crow and segregated communities. But then also the no escape, right? Feeling like you're in this concentrated area and there's no escape for you. And so these are things that I want us to think about when we're trying to provide young people with services, that we are really trying to address many of these things. And I want to move on. So let's talk about pathways. I joke with my colleague Larry and partner when it comes to this work, and I tell him all the time that people always say that, the streets, we're competing with the streets. And I say that the streets and working class jobs have already won in Baltimore, right? And so there's work for us to do to change that. We often know that schools are supposed to be the great equalizer. And through many of our state constitutions, particularly the educational constitutions, we have the word, thorough or efficient or thorough and uniform, common schools, adequate education, public education. We have all these, words within the state constitutions, but yet we know that in many of the school districts that we have been in, we do not see thorough and efficient. We do not even see adequate public education, and we surely do not see uniform education throughout the United States, and particularly in certain states. So we wanted to try to get to Baltimore employment and what is happening with young people after they graduate. And you can see this statistics that we found, employment of Black male in Baltimore. And you can see, in the 70s, 87%, 78, and then 74. But when you look down later on and not in the workplace, right? Labor force, you see in the 2000s, 19, right? Also, if you look on the other side, you see the difference, the annual income percent of white American income earned by black men. And you see 66, 65, 65, and 67. And so things are not necessarily getting better, even though this is a new day. We did some work and we looked at the decades. And once again, you will see the same thing when it comes to professional and related occupations. So these are not, working class jobs. These are professional jobs, meaningful work. And you can see in the 1970s, there was a huge gap, but then also right now in 2000, there's a huge gap as well. Right. Even after a black president. Right. But not only that, when you think about on the other end, when it comes to service occupation, you'll see some of the same, when it comes to the 70s and 80s, 90s, and 2000. One of the things that we discovered is, I think it was in the 1970s, it was like 88 census tracts in Baltimore of whites that were predominantly 90% white. In 2000, we only have 16. Right, so that white flight, that segregation, also the hyper policing of black young people really may have contributed to many of that. But when you look at the rate of what's happening with young people, you see after there was a study in 2018 regarding what happens after 6 years after graduating. You see that 29% enrolled in a 4-year college, 23 enrolled in a 2-year college, and 22 went directly into the workforce, and then 26 not accounted for. Right? That 26 is what we are concerned about, but it's also the 75 that we really need to be concerned about. These are the young people who are trying to do everything right, but there's not enough pathways and not enough information really to help them move on and get the jobs, know about the jobs, understanding their place, as well as fighting discrimination when they get to the job. That's a whole other thing that we should talk about too. I'm running out of time, but really what we found with many of these quotes is young people having high aspirations, wanting to do something but don't know what to do, right? This quote is, I want to move somewhere safer and provide for my family and just be really successful, just like live differently from how I am living now, live my imagined life, like my dreams. And in many of the interviews I conducted, young people wanted to do something. They had high aspirations. They wanted to be, doctors, lawyers, said that the people that actually live here can't work in those places. So we have young people growing up thinking they cannot get jobs in their own city. That's a problem. And then we wonder what's going on, when it comes to they're not performing as much in the way they would like for them. Actually, I'm going to move this on, but there's work for us when it comes to meeting the needs of young people. Also, really questioning this idea of meritocracy. One student says, yeah, we can pull up our bootstraps, but we have no boots. Then what can we do? Something for us really to think about. Another important issue when we think about pathways that we really need to think about is mental health. Our young people in hyper-segregated, areas where police are watching them and often having different issues are really dealing with mental health issues. And it's very serious. The suicide rate is growing. But even when people do get into college, making sure that we protect and provide our young people with the mental health services and support them. Because many of them are dealing with intergenerational trauma. Many of them are constantly dealing with racism. Many of them are constantly dealing with violence. It's that mundane terror that, we talked about earlier. So addressing pathways, what can we do? One of the things I want us to know is that racism is real. And it's something that we cannot hide away from. And we just need to be honest. And how do we support Black people, right? And humanize that struggle. And it's not about them, it's about us. So racism has caused students to believe that they can't get meaningful work in the city that they're born in. Students had high aspirations, but were unaware of the multiple job opportunities that are out in the world. The misalignment with students' aspiration and educational experiences, right? But then also, what I just spoke about is the pathways to address mental health, because it is serious in Baltimore, and I'm thinking in many other urban areas. So recommendations. I think we need to discern and dismantle the strange fruit that justifies structural or physical violence, right? And I think we need to start listening to people and hearing what they say and really uncovering the strange fruit, the inability to really humanize people and not provide people the resources and opportunity so that they can have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for themselves. Another thing that I think I want us to be careful with is this idea of agency and resiliency. I think it's overrated. I think that we're constantly saying students need agency, students need resiliency. What I have experienced, students have more resiliency and more agency than I could think of and imagine. And it's deeply rooted in them, and it goes from slavery on to today. And so I want us to really think about what does that look like in our current, world that we're in, to really address really meeting their social and emotional needs. And for me, it's not necessarily that agency and resiliency, but it's more the healing that needs to take place with our young people when it comes to intergenerational trauma, right? And really supporting them with those needs and helping them be able to navigate these institutions and navigate places where they're looked upon as other, because that's going to happen, right? Students need to, really heal from that. Also, experts, researchers, nonprofit, and school personnel, I think it's time for us to start working together. We can no longer work in silos, but really help each other and support each other with our work, so that we can really develop pathways of success. Larry and I, and also Bob, we're working right now with many city agency leaders on what does it look like to really address pathways in Baltimore beyond just this research. How do we bring 4,000 jobs for our young people, right, to really address what we see in Baltimore. Also, youth need safe and reliable transportation. Youth need livable wages after they graduate from high school and college. It's really sad that we found that many of our young people, after graduating from college, right, after graduating from an AA degree, 6 years after, they're not even making more than $19,000. So there's work for us to do. Also, hold employers accountable for not hiring. Much of our work is on helping young people, but how do we hold employers accountable so they'll hire Black youth from Baltimore City Public Schools system, right? Who's doing that work? We got to start working together so that we are working together and providing safe and healthy and healing environments in school that address mental health, but also the overall just basic human needs of individuals. So I will end right here. I took a little bit more time, and I thank you for listening. We do have a report. If you take the time, please, if you have the time, please take the time to read it, because it's very informative. And this 2-year journey has been extremely powerful for me, because I thought, like, after getting my PhD, I thought I knew it all, and I realized there was so much more that I didn't know. So I'm going to actually bring up Larry Simmons, who is the Director of Community Engagement for the Nobody Asked Me campaign, and then also Aaron Thomas, who's also just been doing every single thing and supporting the work, and a research assistant, and just been really helpful. And I think we're going to together answer some of the questions that you may have, and we're excited about engaging with you with this dialogue. So come on, guys.